let's see what players could actually commit to Penn State in this case. We'll start with the priority targets, guys that Penn State either has had an ongoing recruiting relationship back to when these players were in high school, guys that they've offered. One of them is the Indiana wide receiver, Donaven McCulley. It seems like Penn State's top target, at least in this point, and he has reported that he's received an offer from the Nittany Lions since being in the transfer portal. We'll discuss another Indiana counterpart too right after him. But your thoughts on McCulley?
Big fan of McCulley's game. He was a quarterback in high school, and I think we talked about him on our last podcast. Quarterback in high school, was highly touted kid himself, was a 4-star, so certainly wasn't just like, just a random kid that went to Indiana. He was, pretty talented. Played quarterback his first season in Indiana, then made the switch to wide receiver, 6'5", 200 pounds. Once again, he's the kid who had the 69-yard touchdown against Penn State earlier this year when they didn't have anyone covering him. I did see a clip that he hit 20.3 miles per hour on that route, which is like decently fast. It's not, Tyreek Hill and those guys get like 22, 23. So for being 6'5" and being on the bigger end, 210 pounds, pretty good speed. Still, I think what's interesting about him compared to, we will get to like Julian Fleming in a little bit, I'm sure. Yep. What's interesting about him compared to like a Fleming is that he's much younger. Julian Fleming, I believe, is 22 turning 23. And McCulley, I believe, is only, 20 years old. So when you think about like his growth potential compared to some other kids, because he's not, a graduate transfer, or he might be a graduate transfer, but certainly on the younger end of things. So I just think, you like a little bit of upside, knowing that, yes, whoever comes in, you do want them to contribute right away and be good right away. But that idea of that they haven't, hit their peak and that they haven't plateaued, which once again, we'll talk about Fleming in a little bit, but I think can be a bit of a concern when it comes to him and just some other guys that are, playing in their 5th, 6th, and in some cases, even 7th year of college football, that can they get much better? And is this it? So McCulley has that growth upside. So yeah, a lot to like there. And he's been drawing quite a few offers, Michigan, Nebraska, South Carolina. So will not be an easy target for Penn State to get, but good so far.
No, and I'd lump him in with Josh Kelly as well. Now, Kelly, different. I mean, like night and day here, right? You have McCulley, who's 6'5", and then Jaylin Lucas, more of the specialist type. But I know we'll get to him in a second. But what I'm referring back to is the fact that Penn State always seems to get the Group 5 transfer. Dante Cephas, Mitchell Tinsley, Malik McClain was supposed to be that exception, right? He was supposed to be the Power 5 wide receiver that just didn't have enough opportunities. And there's clearly why he fell down on the depth chart at Florida State, because Florida State's roster was not that good when he was there. Then they brought in a bunch of other receiver recruits, commits out of the transfer portal. And it's no wonder his snaps went down, because there were just better players in front of him. And we're kind of seeing the case of that still at Penn State. But I think my biggest gripe here is that Penn State, I don't want to say settles, but I'm tired of them getting the Group 5 transfers. They really need to go after the Power 5 players. So that's why I included Josh Kelly out of Washington State, Donaven McCulley, Jaylin Lucas, who we'll get to in just a second here, of players who have not only played college football for a while, but Power 5 college football and Big Ten football at that. So my priorities, and Penn State should be as well, is getting 2 guys who, at least one of them, who are not only familiar with the level of talent, but just the familiarity of the landscape. I mean, coming out of the Big Ten is crucial as well, if you can get them to stay in conference like that.
Yeah, no, I think, ideally when you're looking at the transfer portal, you want to take guys that, have proven it on some level. And obviously when you have Group of 5 versus Power 5, which, by the way, what are we calling Power 5 now, considering that the Pac-12, isn't around anymore, and Big 12 is kind of fake, like
Power 4.5, I don't know.
Or 2.5, Big 10 SEC, ACC is like the half, Big 12, what are they anymore? So that's, point for another day. But I was, writing something and I was like, Power 5's not like a real thing anymore. But to your point though, right? Somebody's that proven it, at least for this season at the Power 5 level, in the Pac-12 or the Big 12. The unfortunate thing is those types of guys that are, productive at that level, can be on the pricier side with, NIL things. And we're seeing lots of different guys. I'm not saying, necessarily, Donaven McCulley or these other guys are just simply looking for, the highest payment, which if they are, I mean, by all means, I think that's what a lot of us do in just our day-to-day lives. So how can we look down on a college kid that's, trying to do the same thing? But, those are the ones that the best teams are going after. And yes, Penn State is a top 10 team and, on the brink of college football playoff contention. And hopefully next year we'll be in it. But when you compare them to, a place like Oregon or Washington or even Georgia, where they, have had a little bit more success when it comes to wide receiver, I think that, in Penn State's benefit, they didn't make that offensive coordinator switch. So you can't, take too much from what has happened in past years. But on that same token, you're kind of taking a blind leap of faith. And yes, Andy, how do you pronounce his last name? Kotelnicki, right?
Kotelnicki.
Kotelnicki. Even though, right, he's proven it at Buffalo and at Kansas and, even D3, he still has to prove at Penn State. So, even when you look at, quarterbacks and stuff like that, that's why Drew and his progression and becoming a better quarterback is so important for Penn State, because once Penn State can prove, once James Franklin can prove that quarterbacks can come to Penn State and they can be developed and they can go to the NFL, all of a sudden that, it opens everything up. The reason why Ohio State always gets really good quarterbacks, the reason why, Oregon's in it for Cameron Ward, and Washington's going to become a place that, quarterbacks always look to. So, ideally Penn State gets these, a Power 5 proven wide receiver. It's just that's of course what everybody wants. So it's no easy pickings there.
And I still feel like it's only a matter of time before Marcus Hagans is able to really put his best foot forward here. He's kind of dealing with the ramifications of the way the wide receiver room was left. It was left without a sense of direction. And that's why I'm not here to just totally trash Taylor Stubblefield here, but there was a reason why he was fired. There was a reason why Mike Yursich was fired. There was the disconnect here. So Marcus Hagans is now picking up the pieces with all of this, and he's going to reinvent the wide receiver room. We already saw Christian Driver put his name into the transfer portal. I anticipated some more wide receivers going in, but the way that Penn State likes to operate, they do these things day by day by day. So you saw some of those players go on the first day, and then Chop Robinson makes his announcement. It's actually been fairly quiet. I thought we'd kind of get another day, but maybe some of those players haven't had those decisions, or maybe those after season meetings are wrapping up in this case. Let's get back to Jaylin Lucas, because we've mentioned him quite a bit. So him and Josh Kelly are both smaller in stature, but Jaylin Lucas is listed as a running back who could probably convert to wide receiver, something just more of a specialty type of player. He's described as a specialist, right? Smaller, speedster, shifty. I could see Penn State getting him, and I think Penn State is kind of finished. I don't want to call it an experiment with Nicholas Singleton back at kick returner, but now in his third season, there's more tread on the tires. Him and Katron Allen, I think the days of putting them in the return game are over, just because you want to avoid injury, and that's why you go into the portal for things. Penn State utilizes the transfer portal to complement the program, right? This is a complementary piece. I like Jaylin Lucas a lot because he fills a need that, if you don't look too hard enough, it can go unnoticed if you're not looking for it. And I think Jaylin Lucas is a need here if Penn State's able to land him.
I think that, he's one of the more, like you said, unique players in the portal, because he's, 5'9", 170 pounds, but yet is listed as a running back, but yet has, all the accolades as a kick returner. He's been at Indiana 2 seasons, already has 3 kickoff returns for touchdowns. So, just a dynamic guy with the ball in his hands. And I think, for Andy Kotelnicki, if he can get someone like that into his offense and utilize him in different ways, I don't think anybody really expects, Jaylin Lucas to, whether he goes to Penn State, obviously with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, it won't be the case. But even if he goes somewhere else where he's, the running back depth chart room is a little bit, more open, he's not someone that's going to be carrying the ball 20 times a game just because he doesn't have the frame for it. I think that he's, just from my perspective, someone that's probably likely to make a transition to more of a slot receiver role. He did a little bit of that for Indiana, but was definitely more so, lining up in the backfield. But even when he was doing that, he was very much a receiving threat, a receiving option. He had 34 catches this year, 2 touchdowns. So it was certainly involved in their passing game and utilized that way. So I'm curious on him just because, right, we talked about in our last podcast how a good way for people to understand who Penn State is going after without, seeing who they offered or seeing when they're visiting is just simply by going to James Franklin's follower list or who he's following or going to, whatever Penn State staff member and seeing who they have followed recently. Jaylin Lucas entered this morning. Penn State has been following him for a couple of weeks now. So just put that in the back of your heads, because if we go back last year, this time, before Dante Cephas had officially entered, Penn State staff members were already following him. So I just wonder if, we kind of started this at the beginning of the podcast with, Notre Dame lands Chris Mitchell, who is John Mitchell, Penn State commit's brother, right away. One would have to think that there might have been some, talking prior to, not necessarily with Chris himself, but with parents or with coaches or something along those lines. And I do wonder if Jaylin Lucas is somebody that Penn State kind of had an idea that would enter the portal. And now that he's officially in there, Penn State was his first offer, the first offer that he tweeted out. He's only tweeted out Penn State and Arizona State so far, but Penn State was the first one. So as far as, priority targets, I do think you follow the actions of the staff here. And it seems like Lucas is certainly somebody that Penn State wants to utilize within their offense and on special teams, like you said, if they can land him.
Well, and there's Kotelnicki's influence right away, is that because the way that Kotelnicki operates is it starts out horizontally, and then that's how they attack you vertically by exposing the safeties. But they want to spread defenses out as far as possible and opening up those lanes. And if you're going to get a player like a Jaylin Lucas who can line up in the backfield, who can get in motion, who can shift around, how many players in Penn State's offense can be that creative right now? I would like to think maybe a Caden Saunders could do that, but is he ready to? Would you be able to do that with Nicholas Singleton? Just get him. I feel like you could. I feel like Singleton's athletic enough and has gotten better with his pass catching, where you could move him around and get creative with him in the backfield.
I always like to use this analogy just because I feel like in basketball it's happened more often the last couple of years of like this positionless game where you don't just have, somebody who's just simply a power forward or someone who's just simply a shooting guard, right? You have combo guards, you have forwards. Of course, you're always still going to have room for just strictly centers, but right, you want to have guys that are interchangeable. And I feel like that is slowly, now it's not going to always fully happen in football because positions are so specific at times, but you look at a team like the 49ers where they can have George Kittle, the fullback Kyle Juszczyk, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey can line up at wide receiver. Kittle can line up in the backfield. Deebo Samuel can play halfback, right? They can have all these different personnel groupings while not having to sub anyone out. That's much easier said than done because getting a Deebo Samuel, getting a Christian McCaffrey who can line up at wide receiver and play running back, or getting a Kyle Juszczyk who can, line up as a fullback, and George Kittle and all these guys, it's really, really tough. But I think that's the idea with someone like Jaylin Lucas. And ideally what any good offense wants to do is have guys that are versatile, that can play in many different spots. So like you were saying, guys like Nicholas Singleton, even Katron Allen has been, a pretty good wide receiver, certainly out of the backfield. So the more guys you can have like that, the better. The more versatile you can be, the better. And certainly with the way that Penn State uses their tight ends, Tyler Warren and Theo Johnson have lined up all over the field at different points, the better your offense can be. And then the better that you can disguise what you're doing compared to, some other teams that, have to make wholesale changes when they're going to focus on running the ball versus passing the ball. So Jaylin Lucas, certainly somebody that Penn State's going to be, I think, hard after, and we'll see if a visit will get set up here in the near future.